Around the globe, countries and companies are setting targets to achieve net zero emissions. For companies that commit to net zero, this means that by the year 2050, they will implement measures to ensure that firstly, in any given year, their operations do not release more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere than they will remove through emissions offsets and carbon storage. And secondly, they gradually reduce the amount of emissions released into the atmosphere to zero, or as close to zero as possible. A step along the way to net zero is carbon neutrality. Being carbon neutral means that for any given period of time, a company has compensated for all its greenhouse gas emissions by creating and/or purchasing a corresponding amount of greenhouse gas offsets. However, a company can be carbon neutral every year until 2050 without achieving net zero. This is because compensating for the emissions produced from one's operations is not the same as avoiding the emissions altogether. Remember, even if a company secures carbon offsets, the emissions have still been released into the atmosphere. Net zero means that a company will aim to gradually reduce the actual emissions produced from its operations to zero. This gradual reduction in emissions should also lead to a reduction in the company's need for emissions offsets and/or storage over time. The year 2030 is seen as an important checkpoint on the way to a net zero 2050 for two reasons. First, 2030 is the United Nations' own deadline for achieving the Global Sustainable Development Goals. These goals include objectives for ecological, social and economic well-being. Second, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report released in 2021, to have any hope of meeting the Paris Agreement target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the world needs to almost halve its greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and draw down to near zero by 2050. Globally, the consensus is clear. If we can rapidly decarbonise our economy in the next decade until 2030, we stand a far better chance of achieving the goal of net zero emissions by 2050, along with benefiting from the many social and economic opportunities along the way. What are your plans to achieve net zero?